Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Andrew Labassi.
And I'm Delynn Martineau. We and a few off-screen members are the Veterans Writing Community.
It's December 9th, and we are here at Mount Carmel Veterans Services Center for our Thursday community event on how to tell a true war story. Today, we will be exploring how to use ambiguity and clarity. If you're watching us, please give us a like, subscribe, and a share, and consider donating to us on Cash App at $Writing Veterans. If you're watching this as a recording, please use hashtag replay to let us know. And as always, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat. Please tweet them however you can. We'd love to be able to involve you in our conversation.
Speaking of involving people, I think we should put up a check-in question to see who's out there. So what we want to know is, what's the strangest thing in your refrigerator?
So I can't think of anything offhand for me, but I know I've created some science experiments. So
Yeah,
there could definitely be some strange things there.
Strangest thing I can think of is I have chocolate-covered espresso beans in my fridge, but that's about as strange as it gets.
So we are also going to kick things off with a writing sprint. And during this event, we'll be writing for a total of 15 minutes. So to be ready for those writing sprints, to be ready for that writing, please have something to write on and something to write with. We really recommend using pen and paper rather than computer, just because it slows you down a little bit and you end up writing different things than you would with a computer. And on top, additionally, please keep in mind that we may talk about writing as being therapeutic, but we are not therapists, and today's writing is not meant to be taken as therapy or its substitute. We are more likely to use a term like cathartic than we are therapeutic, because cathartic is a literary term and therapy is a therapy term. We do not do therapy.
So let's get things rolling with a 5-minute writing sprint. A sprint is where we write continuously for 5 minutes without stopping or rereading, correcting, worrying about grammar or spelling. But I do want to let people know, I want to do a shout out to some of the veterans that we made touch with on Veterans Day at an outreach that we did. They gave us some great writing prompts. And so those are some of the ones that we're going to be using today. So the writing prompts that we're going to give you today, you have two to choose from. One is, write about a time when someone gave you bad directions and how did you respond? Or write clear instructions for how to make the perfect cup of coffee.
That second one's probably the harder of the two prompts. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, that's one I'm going to try for. So we're going to start your timer and don't stop.
about 1 minute remaining. About 10 seconds left. Go ahead and wrap up where you're at. Add any punctuation you think you want to have, and we're going to go ahead and get started.
I always like those writing sprints because they really get my mind focused onto what we're going to be talking about. So one of the questions that has come up in our conversations and as we've been thinking about this is, why should we tell true war stories and why should we listen to them? So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So as to why veterans and those who are currently in the military, why should we tell them? For me, at least, it's about understanding. And so I've been to places, I've done things, I've seen things, I've been in situations that most people in this world haven't encountered. They haven't experienced these things. And these experiences have changed me. Some of it's changed me for the good, some of it's changed me for the worse. But anyway about it, I'm changed, right? I am not the person I was before I joined the military. And I think that a lot of veterans come out this other side with a lot of similar changes. And without having been in these kinds of experiences, it's just impossible to understand what it's like. So part of it is understanding, part of it is sharing. Like I said last week, to me, part of telling a true war story isn't the contents of the story, but it's the journey that it takes to get from the beginning to wherever the teller wants to talk about at the end. Like, that's the war story. There may be some actual war that happens in the middle of it, but the war story is the journey. And I know you have some ideas on why we should listen to them. So,
well, and as the civilian counterpart to all of this, as far as listening to them, I think that for one thing, they almost always have some component of interest. Just about every we always say, you know, every veteran has a story, and they're all interesting. We've been working with veterans for about 3 years, and we haven't had one story that hasn't had some really interesting component to it. So there's that, but there's also the idea that, you know, people wonder how they can help veterans, and a lot of times all it takes is simple listening to them. And because listening to them, maybe it's the first time they've told their story. We don't know that. And if they trust you enough with a, you know, kind of a sensitive story or something that's traumatic to them, they may trust you where they don't trust other people. They may kind of shun therapy. They maybe don't want a lot of people to know this intensely personal things. But if you're the person they trust and you are able to help them by just listening to them, there's a lot of science out there that shows that just articulating a memory into language, whether it's spoken or written, it's that translation that helps to heal. So just listening, I think, is a good thing. And then, you know, you can kind of reach an understanding, and it kind of goes the other way. So if telling the story helps reach an understanding, listening to the story helps kind of bridge the gap with that understanding, I think. So I think we can, you know, I think we can really do a service just by paying attention.
So we're going to go ahead and get started with some reading today, and we're going to start our discussion off with looking at ambiguity. And to do that, we're going to do a reading out of Philip Clay's Redeployment, which we have right here. And out of this book, we will be reading a story called OIF. Here we go. EOD handled the bombs. SSTP treated the wounds. PRP processed the bodies. The O8s fired DPICM. In MA, the MA provided CAS. The O3s patrolled the MSRs. Me and PFC handled the money. If a sheik supported the ISF, we distributed CERT. If the ESB destroyed a building, we gave fair comp. If the O3s shot a civilian, we paid off the families. That meant leaving the FOB where it's safe and driving the MSRs. I never wanted to leave the FOB. I never wanted to drive the MSRs or to roll with the O3s. PFC did. But me, when I got 3400 in boot camp, I thought, great. I'd work in an office, be a pogue, be the pogue of pogues, and then go to college for business. I didn't need to get some. I needed to get the GI Bill. But training at BSTS, they told me, you better learn this. 3400s go outside the wire. A few months later, I was strapped up, M4 in condition 1, surrounded by O3s. Backpack full of cash, twitchiest guy in Iraq. I did 24 missions, some with Marine O3s, some with National Guardsmen from 2138. My last mission was to AZD. A couple of Iraqis had driven up fast on a TCP. They ignored the EOF, the Dazzlers, and the warning shots and died for it. I've been promoted to E4, so PFC was taking over consolation payments. But I went with him to give him left seat, right seat. On working off the FOB, PFC always needed his handheld. In the Humvee, it was me, PFC, PV2 Herrera, and Sergeant Green. Up in the turret on the 240 Golf was Specialist Jägermeister Schmidt, aka J15. There wasn't a lot to look at on the MSR, but south of HB, we scanned for all different types of IEDs AQI would throw at us. IEDs made out of old 122 shells, or C4, or homemade explosives, chlorine bombs mixed with AG, V-beds and burned out cars, SV beds driven by lunatics, IEDs in drainage ditches or dug into the middle of the road. Some in the bodies of dead camels, others daisy chained together, one in the open to make you stop, another to kill you where you stand. IEDs everywhere, but most missions, nothing. Even knowing how bad the MSRs were, knowing we could die, we got bored. PFC said it'd be cool to get IED'd, as long as no one got hurt. J15 snapped, that's bad juju. That's worse than eating the charms in an MRE. Temp was 121, and I remember bitching about the AC. Then the IED hit. PV2 swerved and the Humvee rolled. It wasn't like the heat trainer at Lejeune. JP8 leaked and caught fire, burning through my MARPATs. Me and Sergeant Green got out, and then we pulled PV2 out by the straps of his PPE. But PV2 was unconscious, and I ran back for PFC. But he was on the side where the IED hit. It was too late. PFC's iPro cracked and warped in the heat. The plastic snaps on his PPE melted, and even though J15 left his legs behind, at least he got Kazovac to the SSTP and died on the table. PRP had to wash out PFC with simple green and peroxide. The MLG awarded me a NAM with V. Don't see too many 3400s got a NAM with V. It's up there next to my car, and my Purple Heart, and my GWAT Expeditionary, and my Sea Service, and my Good Cookie, and my NDS. Even O3s show respect when they see it. But give me a NAM with V. Give me a Medal of Honor. It doesn't change that I'm still breathing. And when people ask what the NAM is for, I say it's so I don't feel so bad that I was too slow to save PFC. In boot camp, the DIs teach you Medal of Honor stories. Most recipients were KIA. Their family didn't get a homecoming. They got a CACO knocking on their door. They got SGLI. They got a trip to Dover to see Marines lift the remains out of a C-130. They got a closed casket because IEDs and SAF don't leave pretty corpses. The DIs tell you these stories over and over, and even a pogue like me knows what they mean. So I tell my family, I'm staying in. The GI Bill can wait. And I tell my OIC, sir, I want to go to OEF. OEF is where the fight is now. And I tell my girlfriend, okay, leave me. And I tell PFC, I wish it'd been me, even though I don't mean it. I'm going to OEF as a 3400, as a POG, but a POG with experience. I'll distribute SERP again, and I'll roll with the O3s again. And maybe I'll get IED'd again. But this time, out on the MSRs, I will be terrified. I will remember the sounds PFC made. I will remember that I was his NCO, so it was my responsibility. And I will remember PFC himself as though I loved him. So I won't really remember PFC at all. Not why I gave him low pro cons, not why I told him he'd never make E4. Instead, I will remember that our Humvee had 5 packs, that the SITREP was 2 KIA, 3 WIA, that KIA means they gave everything, that WIA means I didn't. So this is a really powerful story for me, not just because of the story that's being told here, the death of someone that worked for the narrator of this story. It's overwhelming in part because of how it's written, and it's definitely intentional. For me, this story is overwhelming in large part because of all these acronyms that are present, the acronyms that Philip Clay included. And so those acronyms and the amount of acronyms that are used, I am positive are there on purpose, and they're there to be overwhelming, but they're there to be overwhelming for everyone. And so as Delyn and I were discussing this piece earlier, one of the things that came up is this piece meant to be kind of confusing and overwhelming just for those who have never had military experience? And I don't think so. Like this is supposed to be confusing for everybody. Philip Clay did that on purpose.
So which brings up, we've had a comment from someone asking what a 3400 is. And so before you explain that, I just want to make the point of, this is exactly what you're trying to say. It's confusing, and it's confusing to people who are veterans and civilians in different ways. And so that's kind of where we're going to go with this discussion.
So there's a couple of military identifiers in here. They're basically just identifying what jobs these people did. And so you'll see the 3400, you'll see the reference to the 03s and the 08s. And I was in the Army, and so I'm used to the Army MOSs, and I'm just not used to the Marine, whatever they have, whatever they call their jobs.
What their designations
their job identifiers are. But basically, you're looking at some kind of administrative clerk. I remember that I think one of those 03s or 08s is infantry, and I don't know what the other one is. So these are all just job identifiers.
So 3400 is what job then?
I think it's admin, some kind of admin clerk. But the whole point here is he could have said administrative clerk. He could have said infantry. He could have said military police. But Philip Clay chose to use these terms that people are not going to be familiar with, 3400s. And he did that so that you have that ambiguity of not knowing what's going on. And so if you have no military experience, this is going to be a really confusing piece of writing to approach, because you're not going to understand a lot of what's going on. But again, like I was in the Army, and a lot of these acronyms are Marine acronyms. And so even though some carry over, like KIA, WIA, DBIED, these are familiar.
OIF.
I don't know what a CACO is. I don't know, like I know what I think they use the term MARPAT in here. And from the context, and because I know enough about the Marines, I know they're talking about clothing. But even with the level of knowledge that I have about the military, because this is taking place with a different branch, it's still unfamiliar even to me. And so this is ambiguous to both of us.
So it's basically just a matter of degree then.
It is. It's confusing to everyone. And I believe that Philip Clay wanted it to be confusing to everyone. And really the only difference is that matter of degree. I am less confused than you may be, but I'm still lost in the sauce as to what's going on here exactly.
I mean, I can understand what happened because of the context of the thing. And I think that there's enough context there to give it a framework. But I think that was really clever of him to use the acronyms to kind of not necessarily hide, but maybe to cause some people to feel that sort of kinship. If you know what these acronyms are, you're in the club, you understand what's going on here more than other people do. And so creates that sort of bond there and therefore highlighting the bond. And that may have been intentional on that. That's why it's really interesting, an interesting read. So using ambiguity as a tool, so not necessarily, writing and just not caring if it is ambiguous, but really paying particular attention.
This was specifically made to be ambiguous, and so what I think that Philip Clay made this one piece as confusing, as ambiguous, as hard to approach as it is on purpose. It's not just done so that, oh, it's a piece to connect veterans to other veterans and like civilians can stay on the outside. No. This piece is written for both people. And so this piece is used to show, I see the ambiguity serving two purposes. One is to show that Iraq is just overwhelming. Like you read this piece and you get a sense for how overwhelming Iraq and combat, and this wasn't even really combat. This was an IED strike that some people died from, but this isn't even real combat. And so like just this one section is really confusing. And so having all those acronyms in this piece, it makes it hard to approach, it makes it more confusing for everybody, and it shows that sense of confusion that you get in country. But at the same time, Philip Clay is talking about something that's obviously hard for him to deal with, the death of this unnamed PFC, the death of this unnamed Marine. And it's obvious throughout this entire writing that Philip Clay, the author, or whoever the author is of this piece, whoever the narrator is of this piece, they're struggling with the death of PFC. And so you see that certain names are used, PD2 Herrera, Jägermeister Schmidt, J-15. Like there are named people in here, and they're not the people that it hurts to talk about. And so Phil Clay is using this ambiguity to make it easier to talk about a topic that he knows is difficult for him. And so rather than just outright saying, it hurts me on some level, on some degree, that this PFC guy died and I was responsible for him and I was there, and so I feel torn up about it. It's a very high level, view on that. But it goes deeper and it shows that sense of confusion and difficulty dealing with. And by using a different method that makes it a little easier, this is displacement. This ambiguity is displacement. And so by pushing off the understanding, it makes it easier to approach as an author.
Makes sense. We should write about it.
Sure.
So this time we're going to sprint for 10 minutes. So remember, no going back, no rereading, no editing. Just write about whatever's on your mind. We're going to give you a couple prompts, one of which is inspired by some outreach that we did a couple months ago. But then Just write about whatever's on your mind. If there's something that's weighing on you, feel free to get it out on paper. You don't have to show anybody. So we're gonna start the timer and get going. Here's our prompts. Write about family within military life, or what's your greatest travel story?
5 minutes remaining. We are halfway there.
All right, so cross your I's and dot your T's, har har, and finish things up. So we dealt with ambiguity in the last section, so we want to deal a little bit with clarity in this section. So what have you got on deck for that?
So we have one of my honestly least favorite things that I ever read, have ever had to memorize, say, we are going to, or I am going to read the Soldier's Creed again for about the 10 millionth time. Yay. But it does, we're choosing this because it does a really good job of being clear. So, the Soldier's Creed. I am an American soldier. I am a warrior and a member of a team. I serve the people of the United States and live the Army values. I will always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit. I will never leave a fallen comrade. I am disciplined, physically and mentally tough, trained and proficient in my warrior tasks and drills. I will always maintain my arms, my equipment, and myself. I am an expert and I am professional. I stand ready to deploy, engage, and destroy the enemies of the United States of America in close combat. I am a guardian of freedom and the American way of life. I am an American soldier. So, whereas OIF was ambiguous and it's kind of hard to approach because it has all of those acronyms and just the things that aren't clear, the Soldier's Creed is the exact opposite. It is exceedingly clear. And so some of the things that clarity does for it is, at least on the surface, it makes the words easier to understand. When you actually start to dig into it, it becomes a little bit harder. But like on the surface, all the words are really easy to understand.
And easy to memorize.
And easy to memorize. It's designed to be easy to understand, easy to memorize, but it's also designed for ownership. So Natalie.
So easy to internalize.
So Natalie, would you throw up the Soldier's Creed again so we can take a look at some specific sections? So it's easier to take ownership because these are positive ownership statements. I am an American soldier. Like there's no room for negotiation on that. It's a direct statement. I am an American soldier. And then you get a little further in and you see that there's still these positive statements. I will never quit. I will always maintain my arms, my equipment, and myself. And so these are clear, unambiguous statements that are designed to not just tell the soldier what their duties are as they're in basic training memorizing this. So my first experience with the Soldier's Creed was before I even really started in basic training. When I was just in the holding for basic, taking all my shots, getting all the in-processing done, all the administrative stuff. So before I was even in basic training, I started reading this. And so the Soldier's Creed is designed to tell the soldier what your duties are. This is what's expected of you. But it's also designed to help to change the soldier into this type of person.
Well, the lines that really got me were, I am an expert and a professional. And for someone who's young, fresh out of high school, hasn't even started any training yet, they're hearing these words and they're saying them over and over and over again. And that may be the first time anybody has positively affirmed them. And so I would think it would go a long way to building self-esteem and to making you feel, if not trained to be, but at least feel like an expert, feel like a professional, feel like, you know what, I've done the right thing. I've made the right choice in my life. This is a career.
So the military has a term that is really uncomfortable for those who have, well, even for some who have been through it, but for those who haven't experienced it, the term of indoctrination feels really scary. That's what this document's designed for. This document is designed for indoctrination. Indoctrination doesn't mean evil, brainwashing, bad stuff. It can, but when you read the Soldier's Creed, part of what it's designed to do is to change a 18-year-old high school student who doesn't have experience and doesn't have anything that they truly are professional about. Well, when you read this poem thing, whatever it may be, 10,000 times, and you memorize it, and you really know what it says, you start to believe it. And like I said, that's part of the indoctrination, is believing that I am an American soldier. But uh, part of that indoctrination is coming to believe that I am professional. I know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm doing. It's it's not just some random words I'm saying. This is something that gets me to eventually believe that this is who I am as a person, and that's growth. And so while this one uh, while this one piece of writing is usually associated with the more negative forms of this brainwashing, the indoctrination, the military mindset, this is something that you can use in your own for whatever changes you want to make in yourself. Part of it's like standing in the mirror and just repeating to yourself, I'm a good person, right? Like
Yeah,
part of it is
positive
just,
affirmation.
yeah, it's just that positive affirmation. It's the repetition. But part of it is saying things is making these statements that you want to be, that you aspire to be, telling yourself that's what you are, and then doing other work in addition to this to move that direction. But part of it is that positive affirmation of saying, I am professional. I know what I'm talking about. I do good work. And by saying it, you eventually come to live it and not just state it. You do it.
But it has something else too. It's pride, it's teamwork.
It works to build all of that. But when you read this document, this doesn't say we are a member of a team. We are American soldiers. This says I am. And this is a whole bunch of people saying it all at the same time. And so it builds that cohesion ultimately.
But it makes you, it seems to me, from looking at it from the outside, make it seem like you are an invaluable part of that team. Like
Yes.
that team has, incorporated you you provide something that nobody else can do. Well, I don't know, but.
Not in the military. Yes. In the military, everybody's replaceable, all the way up to the general.
Wow. Okay. So, but it's those I statements though. They don't leave much room for negotiation.
They don't leave any room for negotiation. It's either I am an American soldier or I'm not. It's not, well, 1 week in a month. No. 1 week in a month, you have to show up and do your stuff. That's if you're National Guard or the reserves. But you still signed up for whatever they want you for. There's an emergency down in Florida because there's a hurricane or something, you're going to Florida. You got a business trip planned, you're going to Florida.
Yep, put everything off. So, I think as far as clarity, I think that's a really good example of the power of clarity. Don't you think? Because I think if there's no room for negotiation, there's no room for nuance. That has that power of, and then when you add in the repetition of it and the indoctrination, as you were saying, I mean, that's powerful stuff. That can really transform somebody's self-esteem, their self-image.
I mean, it's transformed millions.
Yeah.
Undeniably, it's transformed millions, for the good, for the worse, but it has transformed millions.
Yeah, and so how do you think we can approach that same kind of clarity in our own writing? How does that translate?
So this is a little blunt. Like, this is exceedingly clear. And so first you need to decide, how much clarity do I actually need? And that's you can look at it from the opposite direction as well. How much ambiguity do you need? Are you talking about a topic that's difficult to talk about? And if so, should it be exceedingly clear? How clear should it be? But then part of it's going to be playing with it. And so, like I said, this is a really blunt document. This is a really blunt piece of writing. It doesn't leave room for negotiation. But in most writing, that's not necessarily appropriate. So it's always going to be a balancing act. Who is your audience? Why are you writing a specific thing? What purpose do you want to accomplish with your writing within that audience? Because if I'm writing to you, I need to probably have things to be a bit more clear, a bit more explanatory than I would if I'm writing to one of the guys I deployed with.
Or
They've
you're,
been
you're
through.
sitting around the campfire
Yeah.
telling stories.
If the people you're trying to communicate the experiences to don't know the background, haven't lived the background, they're probably going to need a little more explanation. If you're writing to a bunch of people that already have the background experience in what you're talking about, maybe you only need a sketch. And so
It's all
on
about
some
context.
on some level, it is contextual. Clarity is contextual. No, that's not a solid answer.
No, that's
but
true. But it does bring up our tenants. I mean, you're touching on our tenants. So we should probably talk about those a little bit too.
Sure.
So our first tenet is, what do you want your words to do?
So looking back at OIF and looking at the Soldier's Creed, I believe that Phil Clay wanted to accomplish two main goals with OIF. The first is there was a death that he was present for that he felt the need to talk about. And so part of the reason why OIF exists is to talk about PFC's death. But it's hard, it's difficult. And so Phil Clay uses the ambiguity of the acronyms and the other language he uses to help the reader understand that Iraq is overwhelming. And so I think that the ambiguity in this writing serves two main purposes. In the Soldier's Creed, the clarity is all about that sense of ownership. And I think it's all about that sense of ownership. It's making the soldier believe this line, to be indoctrinated in these beliefs. I am an American soldier. I am professional. I am a member of the team. I will. And so it's meant to tell the soldier what the soldier's duties are, but it's also meant to help the soldier intrinsically in their core believe these statements about themselves.
Okay, so how can somebody, because tenet one really is about purpose. So what do you want your words to do is all about purpose, right? So how do we take our own writing and sort of employ those ideas of clarity and ambiguity? I think that's one of the questions that comes up for me all the time, because we have to really think about who we're writing it to. And that's another one of our tenets too that we're going to get to. The next tenet is your message clear? So that has directly to do with what we've been talking about. And
so,
should it be clear? I guess,
and so the obvious answer with OIF is no, it's not clear. But it's designed to not be clear. It's designed to be a bit of a struggle to get through. The Soldier's Creed, as we've stated, is exceedingly clear. It's meant to be so clear that you almost have to try to get some other meaning out of it than what is stated, right? And so there is no room for negotiation. So kind of like I mentioned before, you need to figure out kind of where this falls, because both of these pieces kind of fall on the extreme polar ends of the spectrum.
Right.
And we chose these for that reason, so we could really show what something ambiguous looks like and what something really clear looks like.
But really, it's on a spectrum.
But it's on a spectrum. There's always going to be this kind of continuum that it's going to have some level of clarity. It's going to have some level of ambiguity. You need to figure out what is appropriate and where your piece of writing falls in that spectrum.
And that goes with our third tenet, which is, who is your audience? And should they understand everything you say? And one of the things that we have in there is the word should. Should they understand everything that you say? And so that's really, I think, the question that drives a lot of this is who is the audience? Because the amount of clarity and ambiguity you have in your writing depends on who those people are. But I also think that as we struggle with writing, we struggle with our own sense of clarity. So if there is ambiguity, we don't want it to be accidental. We want it to be purposeful. When Phil Clay writes redeployment, the whole book has got some areas of clarity and some areas of ambiguity, but it's deliberate. And so that's why we have to really be aware of audience too. So, and with the Soldier's Creed, do you want to talk a little bit about clarity as far as who the audience is?
So the audience for the Soldier's Creed are United States Army enlisted soldiers. And so this is for a fairly specific segment. It's for one segment of one branch's population. So it's not even for all of the Army. This is for a specific segment of the Army. And for those who don't know, I don't know what the name of it is, but I know that there's an Air Force Creed. I have seen civilian creeds. And so there are all kinds of different creeds similar to this that the United States military has put together. But this one specifically is for United States Army enlisted soldiers.
And so when we think about things that we write, like let's say you write something during a sprint, you don't necessarily have to share that with somebody. So the audience is just yourself. And so you may be wanting to gain clarity about a memory, or you may be wanting to gain clarity about an event that happened. And writing it on paper can give you sometimes that clarity that you've been looking for. If you choose to share some of your writing or some of your ideas, some of your thoughts, some of your memories with somebody else, you don't necessarily have to write about them, but you could talk about them with somebody. And both people then gain some clarity because the person can then understand better how you feel and what you're thinking. And then you can better understand how you feel and what you're thinking, because just the act of translating it into words makes you think about it, remember it differently. And it also allows, and we've talked about this often too, allows you to gain some distance from it. Because there are some people who are out there who have post-traumatic stress, who have decade or 2-decade-old memories that are rolling around in their heads that they can't process. And sometimes just talking about it or writing about it can help people kind of relieve some of that pressure. So thinking about who's your audience, and sometimes just keeping it simple and having the audience just be yourself, I think is a good way to kind of get started to unblock some of those things. So let's talk about tenet 4, which is, did you leave some things out? Why or why not? And remember that we're talking again about being deliberate about those things, not accidental.
So in OIF, yes, there are definitely things left out, like PFC's name, the name of the narrator of the story. We have a couple of names present, and there's a couple of names that are obviously missing.
And some side characters too.
Well, but there are some names that are present, and there are names that would feel more appropriate being present that are purposely left out. And so Phil Clay obviously didn't want everything to be explicit. He didn't want everything to be known, to be obvious. He wanted some of that ambiguity. And that's why he left some stuff out. In the Soldier's Creed, I think there's stuff left out too. Because I got to tell you, that list of things that we repeat and tell ourselves over and over and come to believe, that is not an exhaustive list of the tasks I had to do in the military. There are a lot of things that I had to do, I had to be, I had to, whatever these positive statements are, that aren't stated in the Soldier's Creed. But these are the core things. These are the things that apply to everybody. And arguably, these are the base. You have to do and be and believe these things in the Soldier's Creed before you can go on and learn how to be a member of a team, how to be a member of a platoon, a company, a battalion, a brigade, a division. You can't be a member of a division until you can be an individual soldier.
And so that's why it's important to have that foundation be really, really clear, because that
Foundational.
way, because it's foundational. It's something everything gets built upon. So, wow, that's really interesting stuff. So when we think about leaving things out, why or why not? I think when it comes to our own writing, we need to think about if we're writing about something, especially if it is particularly painful or traumatic, it's okay to leave things out if they are just too emotionally exhausting to deal with, or you're not ready to deal with it. It's okay to write about things and then just leave a big blank space. Or you might write about what it feels like to write about these things. Rather than writing about them directly, you might write about them indirectly and then pull in some of that ambiguity to sort of kind of prepare yourself maybe at a later time to write about some of those traumatic things. I think writing in general just helps us kind of purge some of the things that are really bothering us. If there are things that and if there are things that we leave out, it may not just be time for us to write about those things. So as we wrap up here, we want to thank you for spending some time with us. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. And remember, you don't have to share your writing with anyone. But if you do want to publish in our journal, the After Action Review, please email us and visit our website. You can arrange a consultation. We'd be happy to talk with you about your work. And we hope that what we did here inspires you to think about writing differently. If you have any ideas about this topic, please leave them in the comments. And join us next time for the last event in our series, Playing with Time. And we'll see you then.
Have a good day, everyone.